This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight.
All right. Welcome to the Nobel Podcast. We've got Kevin Ward with us today. Kevin is Army Ranger, Army Green Beret, police, SWAT police, state police, I don't even know, all over the place, and now our customer success manager. Let's get started. Where are you from?
So I grew up outside the Philadelphia area. I grew up there pretty much my whole life, except for my times in the service on active duty. I went to school around here. I went to DeSales University, up outside of Lehigh County, I should say.
So let's go through the chronological order. How'd you get started? So for whatever reason, people from the Philadelphia area don't ever leave the Philadelphia area. So we've got this funny thing is where everybody knows who you are, that you went to high school with, and we run into it, and that's kind of fun. What did you do growing up? What sports were you into? How did you become, the rootin' tootin' shootin' Ranger, Green Beret,
So I would say growing up, like I said, grew up in an area outside of Philadelphia, Glenside. A lot of people live in that area, still stay in that area. So that's the connection of how everyone knows everyone kind of around there. Playing sports growing up, I played everything from soccer, baseball. Basketball was probably the main sport I stuck with as I grew up.
You're pretty tall.
I am. I'm about, 6'3", so that helps. But I actually was very tiny growing up as a kid. I was like a late bloomer. I didn't really grow till I was in high school. But yeah, I guess while I was growing up, the military always fascinated me a little bit. When I got out of high school, I was probably still too immature to go the military route, so I ended up going to college.
Too immature for the military.
So I went to college.
I like that. Usually, college is the place of immaturity.
Yeah,
it is prolonged adolescence, but so is the military. So
it absolutely does. But upon graduating college, I came back home. I worked that summer, and then I ended up talking to recruiters. The reason I went Army route initially was I talked to each branch of service. The Army was the only one at the time that was paying off the college loan.
Oh.
So, and when I was going into the military, I wanted to just try something hard. Like I wasn't, every time I talked to a recruiter, they were trying to get me to be everything from an MP to a truck driver, all this different stuff. And I was like, no, I want to try something hard. At the time, the Army did not have, you couldn't go right into SF and do the Green Beret route. You had to be in the military for a certain amount of years before you could try out. So I ended up going into Ranger Battalion. It was a great decision. It was a great place for me at the time. I met some great friends, still close with all of them. I ended up going in from 95 and I got out it was June of 99. Came home from the military, came back to Glenside.
No one ever leaves?
No one ever leaves. Ended up doing sales for a short stint. And while I was doing that, I ended up taking the test for the Pennsylvania State Police. That took about a year to go through the background investigation and all that stuff that goes into that. Started the State Police September 11th, 2000. So a year prior to 9/11 is the first day I started at the academy. State Police Academy was about 7 months long. You have to live there. Kind of like a boot camp initially when it starts off there, but not as bad or anything like that. Came out of the academy, ended up being stationed down in the Philadelphia area, down in Delaware County. So I worked my first station for about 5 years. And while I was down there, I ended up meeting a guy who was a Green Beret in the police department, yes, in the state police. So I was talking to him and I was like, well, what group were you in? And he's like, no, I'm still in. I'm like, what do you mean you're still in? He's like, well, I'm in a National Guard unit now that is an SF unit. And I had no idea that they had a unit like that. So got talking to him more, and then I ended up going down to, the unit was out of Maryland, 20th Group. So I ended up going down there and doing a tryout, got accepted into the unit. I was there about a year, not quite a full year, and then they sent a group of us down to go through selection. So I went to selection and passed. I think all of it, there was 10 of us that went down. I think 8 out of the 10 ended up passing.
That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, it was a pretty good selection rate for our group. Came back home. And then I was home for almost a year later before I got to go back to the Q course. Some good things and bad things about the Guard is sometimes that they're a nightmare with paperwork, with trying to get funding and everything released to go back down to schools. it would have been great if we went through selection and then could have just stayed and went through the Q course and just did it all at one shot. But I ended up going back down to the Q course it was February of 2008. So I went through the Q course. There's an
How old were you going through the Q course?
I was 35 when I started the Q course. Yeah.
So that is not a course designed for 35-year-olds. I would venture to guess. I've not gone through it, but I will say that buds, you'd be hard pressed to make it through at that age.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, I would say probably my years prior, I was always good at running and rucking land nav. So I think that helped out. But yeah, that was a concern. I was 35 and I hadn't had a ruck on my back. And my God, it was almost 8-9 years. I was fine. I did a lot of training prior to going to that. Obviously, you can't go into something like that and not train up for it, or you're just looking for a disaster. I actually ended up turning 36 when I was in SEER school. So that was an interesting time for me.
Was that a good birthday present for you?
Yeah, not so much. Camp Slappy.
Right.
Turning 36 is not a good.
Did all the instructor staff treat you well and give you cake?
Of course. Yeah. It was beautiful.
What is a comparison from Ranger School to the Q course and selection?
Ranger School was 3 months. I went through Ranger School in the fall of 96. I ended up going straight through. I would say the Q course is obviously longer, but there's breaks in there, right? Like you got the language phase, you have your MOS phase. So it's not all like a, punch to the stomach, where Ranger School was a straight shot the whole time, from pre-Ranger through Darby, through all the phases there.
I mean, did you have fun? Would you do one over the other? Did one suck more? Was one more mentally challenging? These are things I've heard, but I mean, any kind of take.
I would say, at least when I went through Ranger School back then, it was more demanding physically. It was it was the 1 meal a day thing, very, very little sleep, especially if you're in a leadership role, like you just weren't sleeping. So that was definitely more demanding physically, where the SF course, there's definitely more thinking, more logic to it when you're going through like Rob and Sage and some of those things. Like you definitely have to use your head. You got to be methodical and plan in advance for a lot of that stuff.
Been a police officer for 8 years, and now you're going, spending your time going deploy, going overseas, war.
Yeah. So
the mean streets. How was that going back and forth in that? What was that life like?
It's good and bad, right? For me, it was good and bad because you got to play, Army when you wanted to. I was lucky enough that being a member of the state police, they were accepting of that. Where, obviously they're going to let you go do your thing. They're proud if you're serving in the military, but it does put a strain on that, right? Going through the Q course, it's almost a full year from start to finish. My unit was deploying right when I was graduating. So I just stayed on orders. I did our PMT and then deployed right away. So I was gone almost 2.5 years from the job. So that definitely puts a strain when you come back to your job and your bosses are like, well, are you really going to be here or are you leaving again? But I was pretty lucky.
So one of my favorite things is asking police officers silly stories that they've encountered. Not necessarily dangerous one, but what are some shenanigans that you've got into being a police officer versus shenanigans in the military?
My first station I was at was down in Delaware County, and we would have little side bets going, and the loser of a bet, like it was, it could be a show that's on TV, like, it doesn't matter what the show is, where people get eliminated through the show and everyone would pick a name out of the hat. You didn't get a choice to pick, but if your character was knocked off a show or something like that, the loser that week had to go to full uniform. You had to go to a Dunkin' Donuts at like 9 a.m. and it was a Dunkin' Donuts that was always packed. And there was always someone parked somewhere down the street or across the street to watch this and had to go in and order like 24 donuts in uniform. Right. And, everyone's looking at you. So, we used to do little silly things like that.
Okay. That's
just
good.
To keep it light.
That's good. Yeah. What is a call that you received as a police officer? If not, if it's traumatic, but what are some stories where like, this is wild? Like what is going on here? I can't imagine the ridiculous shenanigans that get called for the police that could be, either crazy and wild and dangerous, but rather that just insane.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of those that go on. Being a police officer, you deal with the public a lot, right? But I don't want to say you're not dealing with the normal public, but normal people, when they have issues, say with a neighbor or something like that, they're going to bring it up and discuss it with a neighbor. You're as a police officer, a lot of times you're dealing with like that 1% that are calling the police all the time. And you're dealing with that all the time. You're not dealing with the average persons sometimes. I remember we hit a meth house that was up in Schuylkill County, which is, outside of Lehigh Valley, the next county over there.
Great meth towns there.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was a meth house. And it was on a large property with trailers all over the property. And I remember when we hit the house, you went in there, there was a guy there full on dressed in a dress, high heels. It was just some very bizarre things that were going on in that house. Meth does some pretty crazy things.
So when you approach that, you want to protect yourself, you're going to do a dangerous thing, and then a guy comes out in high heels and a dress. Like, is everybody laughing as they're doing it? You're probably intense because you don't know what's next, but you're like,
we were hitting the house, and it was, like a hard hit on the house. It wasn't a call out.
Right.
No, when you're going in there, it's one of those things you're kind of like laugh about it after the fact. But while you're in there doing the thing, you're just going putting that individual down. You're going on to the next person, and the next team's just flowing by, hitting rooms. And then we had to clear all the out structures of this place. But yeah, afterwards, you're just like,
it's pretty weird.
Why? Yeah, pretty weird. And you're having a conversation with the guy who's all methed out, and you're like, buddy, why are you in, fishnet stockings, heels, and dressed like,
Did you get a satisfying answer?
And he's having a straight conversation with us. He's methed out as can be. And he's like, the chicks dig it, man. He was dead serious too. And he's like, I got a closet full of clothes in there and they love it. And I'm like, I don't know what kind of chicks, but okay, buddy.
Right.
That works for you.
That's pretty cool. So going through this, you're on the SWAT team. You're going all over the country. Now you're deploying. So where have you deployed before?
So my first deployment was in 2009, going into January 2010. It was Afghanistan.
That's when it started to increase again.
Yeah, it was in Ghazni province. Right before we got there is when Bergdog went missing there or walked off the base. So there was a lot of missions at the time for him, which a lot of those were baited missions where you were getting ambushed or, you were going to be in contact.
So that was a U.S. service member walked off the base and, whether it's treasonous or whatever you want to call it, a U.S. serviceman went missing and then got taken.
Yeah.
And so a lot of American forces had to go out and get the service member.
Yeah, they were going to, all extent to try and find the service member.
Right.
But yeah, definitely a busy summer. And then trying to think, my second deployment was a Jordan rotation. That was in like 2017. We had done some JSETs in between the years, which, obviously month long, 5 weeks, something like that.
Joint Combined Exercise Training. Yeah. Is that what it is?
Joint Combined Exercise Training.
So that's where you train with another force. Usually those are fun.
Yeah. It's, usually it's good team training.
Right.
Because you get to go to, another foreign country. You're training their forces, showing them the basic tactics.
So where did you do those?
So we did one in Panama. We did one in Dominican Republic. Did one in Slovakia, Estonia.
Oh, that's much.
Did a few.
Any of those places stand out of you? Any kind of silly stories from them?
They all have their own individual. When you're working with foreign countries and foreign forces, they're all different. Obviously, the European countries are a little more better trained, I would say, or better equipped as well. Plus, they had rotations in the Afghanistan, Iraq, so they had some experience. Some of the other places like Don Rep and Panama, it's different. Every country is different. They have different forces and different weapon systems. So you get what you work for.
I only ever did one of them. I did it to Colombia, and we were in Cartagena. And it made national news after. So I left. They actually killed the leader of the FARC while I was there, the people we were training. So it was interesting. They did a Miss Columbia pageant in the hotel that we were staying at. And the hotel, it was pretty ritzy and it was weird. And it was just a kind of like a crazy place.
Yeah.
And then President Obama was supposed to visit Cartagena, Colombia, like 2 weeks after I was there. And there was this thing with the Secret Service agent and a prostitute, and it made it.
I remember hearing about that.
Obama did not visit,
yeah.
And it was everybody that I turned over with. And when I left and I saw it in the news, I was like, "That's the hotel I stayed at."
I remember reading about that in the news and following.
And I think the guys probably got too overzealous in whatever that was.
Yeah, I'm sure for the Secret Service, there was probably a lot of fallout from that, right? Knee-jack reaction for anyone that got in trouble from there on out.
I mean, maybe rightfully
probably.
so, as you're about to go do
Yeah.
something. That's
Yeah.
probably not,
Yeah.
maybe the best decision making. But so JSET's deployed.
Mhm.
So the second one was to Jordan.
Jordan, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was right after, it was a year after some fifth group guys were killed there by locals. So that was a year after that. And I remember while we were out there, they were still having the trial for that going on. So it wasn't a bad deployment. Again, we were mostly training people. But there was some visibility or tense areas whenever they had hearings for the individual that shot the Green Berets that were out there the year before. And then my last deployment was during COVID to Afghanistan, where we were at the western side of the country there. So that was an interesting time.
What was COVID like in Afghanistan?
I mean, for us, before we left, COVID had hit. So we were in the middle of our PMT and they kind of shut everything down.
Right.
They were supposed to move us to Texas to do some training there, and then all that kind of got closed down. We were on a small base, and they ended up pretty much moving everyone off that base except for us and the active duty soldiers that were with us as well. The deployment was fine. It was kind of uneventful. We did some KLEs, like key leader engagements, but we did not. There wasn't many missions that were being run at the time. They were kind of winding down and closing Afghanistan down, I should say.
Did you ever go to the key leader engagement and insist they wear masks?
Yes. No, they really didn't wear masks. I mean, it was just like, it was funny because before we left the U.S., everyone was masked up. You couldn't find toilet paper, everything. It was chaos. But while we were deployed and we got over there, I mean, other than Bagram, which they were kind of strict with some things, once we got down to our FOB, it was normal life. Nobody, even our partner force, nobody was wearing masks.
As you're coming out, so you've had this, a long career both in police and military. Mm-hmm. What was it like coming home and then going back into the police force? Did you find difficulties with that, with the escalation in one environment, totally different rule sets?
Yeah.
How is that going from one to the other?
It wasn't too bad. I mean, everyone's different on how they're perceiving things and how they come back. And it depends on how crazy your trip is. Usually when I would come back from a deployment, I would always, at least try and take 2-3 weeks off before going back to work, just to, spend time with family, this and that, friends, decompress, get on a normal sleep pattern again. But for the PD, it wasn't too much of an issue with me. No. Coming back from that. Yeah, it's two different hats.
Even coming from 2010 when it sounded like that was a lot more action environment.
Yeah, that one was a little adjustment just because I'd been gone for, almost 2.5 years, between the Q course and then the deployment and then coming back from that. Yeah, that was, I think I took off like a month before going back to the job at that point when I came home. But again, getting on a normal sleep routine and yeah, because that was a particular busy deployment. So yeah, there's definitely, we all have that downtime and decompression time that you have to go through coming back from trips.
What did you do for decompression time? What would that look like for you coming home?
Honestly, for me, a lot of it was just trying to get workouts in, trying to keep in a rhythm again of doing that, keeping your body healthy, trying to eat healthy again. Obviously you're drinking, hanging out with friends because they all want to take you out and hang out with you. But yeah, my decompression was obviously like family and friends, community. That was the biggest help.
Did they ever make you do decompression stops? Was that in the Army? They made us do that in the Navy.
No, when you came back in 2010, they run you through the test, the TBI test, taking this simple little math test. But like most of the guys don't care. Like when you come back, you don't want to do any of that crap. You just want to like go home. You want to get back to see your family, friends, things like that. So no one really takes it serious.
So we had things where when we came home, they made us sit down with the psych and so you had to do that. And they had decompression stops. So they made us stop in Rota, Spain when we wanted to go home. So you had to listen to like a bunch of different briefs on like PTS or whatever it is. And you're in, a town to go from like a war zone to like a nicer thing where they have designated drivers and they like have like nice meals or whatever before they let you go home. And then we did another one where they did it in Ocean City, Maryland. Yeah. And you're I lived in Virginia Beach, so you just wanted to go home. And you're like, why do we have to stay in a hotel in, an hour
away from your home,
away from my home and stay there for 3 or 4 days? Did you have any of those as you were coming home?
We didn't really, what we did was probably 2 months or so after we came back from the deployments, 2 or 3 months. Then they would have a get together where they did it at a hotel or something like that, where they'd have a psychologist there.
They'd
Different
go
people.
first.
Yeah. We would come home really. We'd always come back, usually fly back to Bragg. You come off your orders, you do some paperwork, that type of stuff, hit medical, all those different places, like out processing almost. And then you would go home and you would start your leave. And then usually, like I said, within 2-3 months, they would do like one of the yellow ribbon events where they would have a psychologist there and different stations that you would have to check in at.
So you spent how many years in each, in the police, and how many years in the military?
So I spent about 21 years, a little less than 21 years in the police. So the police department allowed me to buy back military time. So I was able to buy back my years when I was in the 75th. So I bought back 4.5 years. And then 25 years for the state is when you're at your retirement point. So I was able to get out after doing about 21 years, and then military 23 total. Yeah.
Okay. So how would you compare those two careers that you did kind of in tandem? What are the ups and downs? What are the benefits of one to the other? So, I mean, I think a lot of serving your country is, something that I always want to do. And, I served whatever it is. You did kind of both longer. The police force, I think also the perception of it has changed.
Yeah.
How do you hold, your pride for each and the difficulties each one brings?
So they kind of intertwine a little bit, right? There's differences, right? So room clearing, things like that are different law enforcement wise, as opposed to, when I was going through cephalic and some of those things like the, when we would go down there, like every 2-3 years, we'd go through cephalic, which is our, room clearing, explosive breaching, all that type of stuff. Different techniques there. So the big difference, I would say, is leadership in some of the organizations.
So let's get into that.
Yeah.
What organizations were you in that you think were particularly well run, and which ones were maybe had opportunity to be run better?
When I was on our SWAT team, the leadership there was very good. Looked after each other, call each other out, kind of like the military, right? Like, amongst your team, if someone makes a mistake, you own it. And, if someone calls you out on it, you own it, right? You own it, you learn from it, and you move on. That was very similar to that on the SWAT team. If someone makes a mistake, like we keep it in-house, but you're going to own it, right? If you make a mistake, you better own up to it and move from it and learn from it. Very similar to that, at least on the ODA. Policing up your own and making sure that you learn from mistakes or anything like that. So the leadership there on both sides was good that way. Leadership with the state. I've seen good leaders and bad leaders, right? The higher you go up in the state, it's more, I don't want to say more political, but you are kind of removed a little bit from the lower ranks. So there is a little disconnect, at least from what I saw on there. But again, once you're, it's a large agency, you're talking 4,800 men and women with the state. And it's spread out throughout the whole state, right? And again, every barracks has different leadership. Each station has different leadership, and sometimes they're run differently. It's just how it works.
It's tough. Coming from the military, I think the SEAL teams, I had this idea that the leadership would be impeccable, and I didn't find that to be true. I found that the people were amazing, so it almost didn't require great leaders.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that I learned were the things that I wish I would not have seen. So I tried to not replicate the mistakes that I saw.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of curious, comparing the military to the police force. They're kind of both big, and once you're so big, the rule sets you have are very different. Did you notice one was more regimented than the other?
The police departments nowadays are very knee-jerk reaction, right? Something happens in the media, whether it's your department or not. It's all of a sudden mass sweeping change. Whether your agency had an issue with this or not, sometimes you're higher up and, would make policy changes and things based on that, which some are good. But a lot were just knee-jerk reactions where there was no issue here. Why are you creating it as an issue? Right. I've seen stations that I worked at where you have great leaders there and they run smoothly and people love coming to work. And then I've seen some stations where there's bad leadership and people hate it and they're transferring out and, and it affects morale, it affects all that.
Do you think that it has gotten worse over time, better over time in the police force in particular?
I mean, when I got out, a lot of police departments were at a low there, you're talking 2-3 years ago.
I think there's a lot of criticality
movement was pushed. Right? Yeah, it was during the elections. Defund movement was pretty strong. But I got out at that point. But I know a lot of local departments and everything were feeling that stress and just morale in general. Where a lot of people now are not trying to become police officers.
So that's a question. What's the hope for the future if all of this negativity is for police departments? How do we recruit good people so that you have the right people making the right choices? Good police versus bad police. How do we put the right people in there?
Yeah, it's a great question, but I wish I had a good answer for that. It's tough because the perception now is so low in that profession. A lot of departments now are struggling to hire people, so they're dropping things like college degrees and things like that, which doesn't mean that because you went to college you're going to be a better person or smarter. Like college is a degree, it's a piece of paper at the end of the day. It's real about just trying to find quality.
I mean, I feel like most people I've ever met are, obviously I don't know everybody, but are very well intentioned and they want to serve. Like that's the whole point. And it's a little upsetting to see that some who might want to serve might be pushed away.
Yeah. Well, I think whenever there's a bad police officer or something like that, it takes such spotlight that it shines on all police officers, and it's such a low percentage of that. But again, it affects people now. People don't want to go into that career because of that. And I think that's going to have bad consequences, obviously, in the future. If you can't hire people and you can't hire the right people, eventually they're going to need numbers. And that's when, bad individuals may slip through the cracks because they have to hire people. That's the bad side of that.
So, I mean, that's a difficult answer for the future, but hopefully we continue to get good people who want to serve and kind of push it forward. What were motivators for you as like a kid growing up into that?
Growing up, like I never wanted to quit at something. Whether it was sports, like I would play them for hours if I could. And I think when I got out of college and I was going in the military, I remember, recruiters and them, well, it's really hard. If you wash out, you're going to go to the needs of the Army and you'll go wherever you want. And I remember going through, it was called RIP at the time. And I was like,
Ranger Indoctrination Program.
Ranger Indoctrination Program. Now it's called RAS. But I knew in my mind I was never going to quit. Again, when I was going in the military, I always wanted to try something difficult. Like I didn't just want to go. I wanted to see how hard it was, and I wanted to see if I could, push myself to that limit.
Did you have like your parents or a mentor or an uncle or a family member that was in the military that you're like, I should go do that? Or was it just something that you kind of got?
So my father was in the military. He was in the Navy for a few years, but not like a career or anything like that. But really, I had a couple uncles that were in the Army. I had a pretty tight family growing up, pretty tight Irish Catholic family growing up. My mom was right off the boat. A lot of my cousins were right off the boat. So tight family, but yeah, just never quit on something. When you start something and you're going to commit to something, like either, going through buds or any of that stuff, like, was it in your mind that you were going to quit?
No, I mean, the whole thing, we named this No Bell, and in buds, if you ring the bell, you quit. So the whole idea is that it's really tough to beat somebody who doesn't quit. It's almost impossible. Even, as I would wrestle somebody, every now and again, you can tell somebody was better than you maybe, and you got a good takedown and you kind of got lucky in, you could feel their body quit.
Yeah.
And you just knew to drive through it. And somebody that you were much better than, so like I grew up wrestling, so I'm using that. But if they were somebody who just wouldn't be pinned, it sucked to wrestle them. Even though like you're destroying them, they weren't quitting.
Yeah.
And it just turns out over time, if you don't quit long enough, you end up winning.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that stuff is beautiful to me. And I speak that language, and I think it's a lot harder to say the words like, well, I just don't quit. And then to find somebody who's like at the end of it, cool hand Luke digging a hole and then refilling up the hole. That speaks to me.
Yeah. It was always interesting, like even going through RIP and then again going through selection and a Q course. It's interesting because you see people and you see some people that are like, man, that guy, he's a beast. But then they quit after like a week. And I'm like, what the heck happened to that guy? And it's, in my mind, it had to be just obviously mental. but it never entered my mind that I was going to quit on any of those events or anything at all. Like I would go after it and give it my best shot, and I was never going to quit, like ever. It never entered my mind, no matter how much it sucked or
Right.
I was never thought about, I'm going to quit. Like, just didn't.
A guy,
I'd be embarrassed
if I
if I did. That's really it. I did not want to quit at any of those things.
a guy in my boat crew in Hell Week, for whatever reason, my individual boat crew, the whole team made it through, which is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
The odds of that are very low. And one of the guys in it, so I was with him, the whole week basically, wrote no fleet, no on one shoe and fleet on the other shoe. And what you said is like it'll be the needs of the Army,
needs of the Army,
the needs of the Navy.
Yeah.
And all you had to do is look out the ships that were out on the water, and like that could be you.
Yeah.
And I don't know what a motivator that was, but I'll never forget that he had no fleet written on his boots.
Yeah.
And you're just like, that's pretty weird. And no instructor even bothered to look at it, because at that point they're not looking at that. But because you have to shuffle so much, and when you were soul crushing, you have a boat on your head, you're just going, you look at your feet a lot. You have to, just because to not step on,
to
keep
in front of you,
or you're on soft sand to break your ankles or whatever. You have to look where your foot placement is a lot. So a lot of Hell Week, you're looking down at your feet. He's just reading no fleet. I thought it was pretty cool when I saw it, but that never quit thing, no fleet means never quit.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I used a lot of the, movies, even like pop stuff. Like there was nothing extraordinary that were motivators for me, but for some reason things lived in my head. When Bruce Lee says, "Be like water," I thought that was more profound. And I think it actually is. Like the pop culture things really stuck in my head. Like that guy is, cool or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So we'll give you a little bit of a lightning round. What are a handful of movies that affected your life, or like that you really enjoy? It doesn't have to be the best ever made, but things that stuck with you, that had moments maybe growing up or even now. So what are like 5 good quality movies that kind of affect you?
Let's see. I used to watch Untouchables, older movie. Yeah. Man on Fire, I always liked.
Pretty good.
Devil's Brigade. I have to throw that one in there. Yeah.
Which one is that?
Start of it was the start of SF, if you would, from way back in the day. Growing up, I didn't read a lot of military books or anything like that. It was just something that always intrigued me. And I knew eventually I was going to do the military at some point in my career or my life. Actually, like when I was in college, I knew when I was coming to the end of that, my senior year, I was like, I got to do this, because if I don't do it, it'll haunt me. It'll always be on my mind. What if
you enlisted though after?
I did enlist, yeah.
So why? So I also enlisted after college, which is unusual. We were not the typical, like you try to go be an officer, it pays more money, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Why did you enlist?
So when I first went in, they were paying off all my school loans. When I was in basic training, they pulled us all aside. Anyone that had 2 years of college or more, and then they were offering you the OCS, Officer Candidate School. And initially I thought about it, and then when they presented it to us, they said, you're going to get, basically a new contract. And I wouldn't be able to go on to my Ranger contract, my RIP contract, that, I could get reclassified into something else. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. And they're like, well, why don't you? And I was like, I came in to try this and make this happen and see how difficult it was. And I don't want to go another route. I didn't want to be artillery. I didn't want to be anything like that, or supply. I was like, I wanted to go on to do the Ranger contract. And, I remember the company commander at the time at basic training was yelling at me, telling me I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. And I remember I was 21 at the time, and I remember thinking, I'm like, well, I can drop an OCS packet anytime I want, right? Like, up to the age of, I think at the time it was like 35 or 32. And I'm like, I'm 21. Like, I could do these 4 years and then drop an OCS packet if I wanted to. But I never went that route. And I didn't regret it. It was, I made a right decision there.
So I agree. I ended up getting my MBA afterwards.
Yeah.
I was actually enrolled to go to law school when I enlisted. So, that's an unusual path. And I wanted to be a SEAL, and it's really hard to get those orders otherwise. And the goal was only to be a SEAL. And even in the SEAL teams, they're like, do you want to be an officer? And I was like, no. And when my recruiters said, do you want to shoot people in the face, or do you want to be in the back of the radio? And I said, I want to shoot people in the face.
Yeah.
And then he's like, well, it's enlisted. An officer's in the back of the radio. Like, that's the reality of it. And I think that a lot of the officers have disappointment in their careers because they can't be snipers. They can't be JTACs. They can't be breachers. They can't do the job that they thought they could do, that they dreamed of since, childhood, and they fought super hard for. And then they go in, they realize you get the mission for the boys do the mission. And I think that there's some reality to that people, when you sign up for the thing that you want and you have to do something else, it's pretty disappointing. I think a lot of people, at least in the SEALs, the officers leave because they never got to do the thing they wanted.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some power. And I at least like to explain that to people who are going in, that, it pays more. There's more prestige. I'm not saying that one way is right and the other. It's probably more right to go be an officer, and that's fine. But if you want to go into special operations, it's okay to have your degree and be really smart, but also a door kicker. In fact, it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I have nothing against officers. It just wasn't the route I wanted at the time. I enjoyed the door kicking part. And not to say that officers wouldn't
doors
enjoy it.
Or being good at PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Well, that's not. I could do the PowerPoint, but can I kick doors as well? Well, not really. Well, I'm going to go to the door kicking path.
Yeah. And I do the same thing when I've had a few people talk to me because their kids were talking about going in the military, and, same thing, different routes, right? And I've explained to them the Green Beret route. I've explained to them the Ranger Battalion route. And, one thing I always tell the kids, their kids that are going in, some of them have college or coming out of college and kind of doing the same path. And like, look, if you decide to go enlisted and you want to go to one of these routes, or you go officer and try and go one of these routes, like, just don't quit. Like, it's the only, people are always looking for some hidden advice. And I'm like, listen, it's you're going through those things. It's a small price to pay for the ride of a lifetime, right? The small pain to go through a couple weeks of selection or some of those things. But on the back end, it's the ride of a lifetime that you'll never get. And you'll never regret it. I go, just don't quit. Like, there's no other advice I can tell you is be in shape, constantly try and be in shape. Don't beat yourself down to the point where you break yourself, but, be in shape. Don't go and embarrass yourself, and don't quit. And that's
for the ride of a lifetime.
Yeah. It'll be the ride of a lifetime. And I guarantee if you quit, it'll haunt you forever.
I like that. That's profound. We'll take it to the last part. So, you now do customer success at Zero Eyes. Yeah. We got you as you transition out. You bring us credibility with your background and who you are and who you know. We're honored to have you on our team. How's this transition out of the military been?
Transition's been, and it's been awesome. I can say that when I was retiring from the law enforcement side and the military side, the next career I was choosing, I had one thing, and I was like, I just don't want to work for jerks, right? Or people who are just a pain or difficult to work for. I wanted to work with people that are, easy to approach, great leadership. And this company's been great. Like, everyone at this company has been fantastic. Like, from every department I've worked in, everyone helps out. It's great to see. It's a great thing to see and have. It's a good thing to be a part of.
We got hooked up right before you were going to retire, right? Like, we had set up, or like, it was right around the same time. So I don't know if that.
I had retired, and then I had shoulder surgery because I tore a rotator cuff. And then, it was probably about 8 months after I retired is when I first started interviewing with you guys. Yeah.
So we're certainly honored to have you. This has been awesome. Thank you for sitting down and sharing your story. And I guess the pain of a moment is worth a lifetime of adventure. So.
Yeah. Short ride.
That's it.
Short pain ride for the ride of a lifetime.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you very, very much, Kevin. Thanks for sitting down with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to zeroeyes.com/nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.